good to go.
CJ must have been here. Okay, well let me pick. Thank you so much, Jeff. Let me pick it up from the get-go. Yeah, so this is the second installment of our Global Transformation Project panel discussion series that launched on February 5th, 2023. And so today is the second installment of this series, and this is a really exciting project. The way that I got led to the Global Transformation Project and to becoming part of this discussion series was the culmination of a 40-year collection of mind-body science. And it started with me early on with meditation, trying to understand scientifically what was happening with me when I went into a meditative state, and to try to understand why I was getting the benefits that I was getting. And then that led to a 40-year collection of science. And then when we founded World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, because my main background is Tai Chi and Qigong, and of course, meditation, mindfulness is part of that, and yoga and Tai Chi overlap so much. So the reason that the Global Transformation Project focuses on getting the big five mind-body practices, Tai Chi, yoga, Qigong, mindfulness, and meditation into public education is because the science behind those things are just so massive. And so as we collected this science over the 40 years and then tried to distribute it out, in the case of World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, to Tai Chi and Qigong teachers all over the planet so that they could share it with their local schools, hospitals, prisons, government, and media. And so now with the Global Transformation Project, we're forming a worldwide mind-body coalition to encourage yoga enthusiasts and teachers and organizations, Tai Chi and Qigong, mindfulness and meditation, to advocate for this petition at globaltransformationproject.org, which we will then reach out to United Nations missions all over the world to get it in, because what the science shows is it would bring education up to a whole new paradigm, increasing GRE reading scores, math proficiency skills, verbal fluency, improving test scores, behavior, focus, reducing bullying, boosting the immunity of students all over the planet in a really profound way. And so all this science was in on it. But as we were doing this, we became aware of the Global Consciousness Project that evolved out of early research at the Princeton Engineering and Anomalies Research Lab with Dr. Johns and Brenda Dunne. And we have one of the leading scientists in this field of how consciousness affects the planet. And so anyways, so the way, just quickly, how we got into that was when we found the Global Consciousness Project has random event generators that collect data all over the planet. And what they found was that when human consciousness came together, it created states of coherent consciousness. And the first one that they discovered was the funeral of Princess Diana. They had a big effect on their computers all over the planet. And so we contacted them when we found out about it, and we said, we do this event called World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, where people all over the planet come together to do Tai Chi and Qigong for a 24-hour period. Could you look at it? And they said, yeah, no problem. And so they looked at it, and but they didn't get back to us. And so we were disappointed. We just kind of forgot about it. And then in 2021, at the end of 2021, I was getting ready to release this new second edition of the Gospel of Science, which collected all this 40 years of science. And I contacted the Global Consciousness Project again, because I wanted to see if maybe the International Day of Yoga or some of these other global mind-body events that have spawned since World Tai Chi and Qigong Day started 23 years ago, I think. And they got back to me right away this time, and they had a list of many global mind-body events that had shown results. And World Tai Chi and Qigong Day was right at the top of it. And so that threw me into researching more avidly the science behind consciousness. And it just became incredibly exciting and just amazingly profound, with a very hopeful vision for the future of humanity. And what it found was that our consciousness can not only affect the consciousness of the entire planet, like we do on World Tai Chi and Qigong Day each year, but it can actually affect physical reality. And Dr. Dunne is going to be talking about some of this incredible science that shows that our consciousness is actually affecting physical reality. And so one of the things that spurred me to work on these projects and pour so much of my life into it was that I began to realize that mind-body practitioners have a more powerful effect on the global consciousness and also the physical reality changes that our consciousness makes than people who don't practice these things. That's what the data has shown in some experiments. And so in Tai Chi and Qigong, one of the things that I realized over 23 years of organizing World Tai Chi and Qigong Day is that there was a bit of a schism within the Tai Chi and Qigong world, where a lot of the ancient tenets of Tai Chi and Qigong, which are about how our consciousness affects our lives and affects the future and affects the whole world, and Qi and the life energy, which is, I believe directed consciousness is what Qi is. It's this life energy that is part of this field of energy, and this is what all this science is beginning to show. And but that part of Tai Chi and Qigong suffered a lot of repression. I began to discover, and I didn't realize that because, as Tai Chi and Qigong teachers, we only know the school that we're trained in. And the school that I was trained in, consciousness, meditation, Qi, Neigong, energy meditation, it was all an integral part of our Tai Chi program. But I began to realize that aspect had been suppressed in a lot of Tai Chi and Qigong. And I think it was because there's kind of a materialistic cult in popular culture and in popular media and also in science, unfortunately. And perhaps Dr. Dunne will speak about that a bit in the future. But it's this materialistic kind of way of looking at the world. It's a Newtonian way of looking at the world that doesn't fit into the quantum reality of what we live in. And our consciousness is entangled with physical reality. And so as mind-body practitioners and teachers and proponents, I feel that it's time for us to take our place at this critical moment in human history where we're beginning to realize that we're creating the future. And one of the studies that I came across when I was collecting all the science, and I refer to it in the book, the new second edition of the Gospel of Science, is that they did a massive study involving thousands of people over 20 years. And what they found was that the greatest indicator of people's future health and well-being was their vision of their future health and well-being. And so, where we are as a planet is, after everything we've been through over the last 2 or 3 years, I've become to realize that we have a very squeezed and very fearful and somewhat hopeless, I'm talking about the mainstream popular culture, a somewhat hopeless vision of the future of humanity. And when you start to look at the science that we're going to be looking at today, you're going to see that there's a very hopeful possibility. And the Global Transformation Project that's what it's all about. And so we've got Dr. Jeff Dunne with us, and Dr. Dunne's mother, Brenda Dunne, worked with Dr. Johns at the Princeton Engineering and Anomalies Research Lab on some of this world-altering science. And Jeff is continuing that project, and he's been a researcher in his own right as well at Johns Hopkins University. And one of the things that I just want to say before I introduce you in a moment here, if we can put up Jeff's bio, that would be great, Siobhan. But what I wanted to lead into you with is that at the beginning of my book, the new second edition of the Gospel of Science, I open it with a quote from Nikola Tesla. And he said that when science moves into the study of non-physicality, consciousness, it's going to make more progress in 1 decade than it has in all the history of science. And so Dr. Dunne, in my opinion, and I believe in reality, in history will come back and show this, they are scientists like him and like some of the other guests that we had on last time, Dr. Roland McCratty, research director at HeartMath Institute, and also Dr. Roger Nelson, the founder of the Global Consciousness Project, that these people are doing the most important science in the history of science. And so this discussion series, we're trying to bring that science out to the mass public because, again, the mainstream culture, mainstream media, mainstream news, they tend to have a very materialistic, limited view of reality, and they're ignoring a lot of the most important science that's going on. And what I found as a Tai Chi and Qigong teacher and practitioner is the more I understood this science of consciousness, the more it augmented my own ability to do these practices and to get more out of these practices. And when I trained in traditional Chinese medicine, they made the point again and again that the more that a patient understands the treatment that they're getting, acupuncture or herbology or whatever, the more effective that treatment is going to be for the patient. And so they were talking about unlocking the consciousness. And so that's true of the global mind-body community and World Tai Chi and Qigong Day and the Tai Chi and Qigong community. And so if we understand these things and understand this new science, it's going to facilitate even larger experiences of these ancient arts that we've been practicing ourselves. And I've seen it in my own life, and I've seen it in my students too. It's changed them as well as I've become more and more aware of this science. So now, if you have, do you have Jeff's bio handy? I'm sorry, I don't have it handy.
Yes, I shared the screen for a little while. I'll put it back up. We're so happy to have Dr.
Please
Jeff
go ahead.
Dunne with us. I hope everybody can see the screen.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
and
I was talking.
On a personal note, I'm thrilled because I had the privilege of knowing his mother, Brenda Dunne, who was a co-researcher with Robert John at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. And Jeff is a Renaissance man. Not only does he walk in science, but he also is an author, and we'll get into that later, and a playwright. But we're here mainly today to talk about the continuing research, and now it's under the ICR, the International Consciousness Research Laboratories. So without further ado, Jeff, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me here. This is exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate the opportunity. It occurred to me that as sort of a starting point, since I'm not sure that everybody would necessarily be familiar with the PAIR lab, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab that was mentioned, it might be worth just taking a moment and providing a little bit of background on what PAIR was and what it did, and then what ICRL is in that context. And then I can tell you a little bit about how I fit into that as well. So the PAIR lab began in the late 1970s, and it was the result almost of a sort of an accident, one might even think. There was a student who had become familiar with some of the work that was being done at the Stanford Research Institute, and decided that she wanted to replicate the results that were being seen there, in terms of people trying to influence physical systems. And they also did a tremendous work on remote viewing. And so there's a whole slew of things. I can't possibly get into all of this in the time that we've got. But she wanted to do this project. She went around to the faculty at Princeton and said, hey, will you advise me to do this as a senior project? And sort of consistently throughout the engineering faculty, everybody said, no, that's not worth doing. That's crazy. She went to Dr. John, Robert John, and said, hey, I want to do this, but nobody will advise me as a for my project. And he was likewise skeptical, like, well, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you think that just by having some kind of thought or intention towards a machine that you would affect how it would work, right? If you've got electrons doing their thing, they're going to do their thing. But after doing a little bit of background research and looking into the stuff that was happening at SRI, that's the Stanford one, and thinking more about the experiment, you realize, well, there might be something here, but at the very least, even if there's not, it's a really nice project. It involves designing equipment and involves setting up protocols and all the things that you would want. And so he went ahead and said, I'll advise you if nobody else will. And that's what he did. And so they did. They did the foundational research. They did experiments, and lo and behold, what they found was that the effect seemed to be real. There was an effect going on. Somebody sitting there concentrating, trying to influence a physical system was, in fact, actually influencing the physical system. And it was really out of that the that the lab was born. After that, he decided he really needed to set it up. He identified funding, and he was aware that at that time, he really needed somebody else who's going to manage the lab, who was going to provide a kind of a complementary aspect to this. So he came with the physics and the academia kind of structure of an engineer physicist doing these sorts of things. But he wanted to have, as a laboratory manager, somebody who brought that other side. So his was, you can think of it as a reductionist. He wanted somebody who was more holistic. He wanted that balance. And that's where Brenda Dunne came in. They got connected, and it was together that they established the laboratory and put together the protocols, the experiments, and started to do the research. And obviously the staff grew after that. One of the early people who joined the effort was Roger Nelson, who was the person that Bill mentioned briefly, who started later doing the Global Consciousness Project, as well as several others. And the thing that was really exciting about PAIR is that they didn't study people, they studied the effects. That is to say, they were focused on the machines and what can be done. So they weren't looking for gifted psychics or anything of that nature. That it was normal people doing experiments, and they weren't trying to come up with the glorious instances of, look, we did this incredible thing that can't be explained. It was a very systematic approach. And by doing this over the course of about 3 decades, they accumulated a foundation of data that demonstrated that intention can affect physical systems. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about big things that drop 9,000 balls down from a hole in the ceiling, bouncing through pins to form a Gaussian distribution that maybe you try to shift to the left or to the right, or maybe it was a purely electronic device that was sort of an electronic coin flipper where you try to make it give more heads than tails. Fountains, they did all kinds of different experiments. There was also protocols where they were looking at remote viewing, for those of you who are familiar with that, essentially gaining information that traditional approaches to understanding the world would say are not possible. And what they were able to establish was evidence for the presence of this at odds that just could not be denied. So, standard scientific protocol says you start looking at something as potentially being real and worth exploring if it was sort of a 1 in 20 chance. The results that were obtained from PAIR would happen by chance, maybe once in 4 lifetimes of the universe.
Wow.
So what they were able to establish was this is not a fluke, and it's not an accident of anything. This is a real effect, and it's worth studying, and that became the foundation for this.
Hey, Jeff, could I share something that we talked about for just a second? We talked about this earlier, but I think that it was Russell Targ's research at Stanford University, where they were, I think it was remote viewing, where they were bringing people in to teach them how to do remote viewing. And they had a questionnaire that they asked them before they came in. It was the only thing they asked them. They said, "Do you think this is possible or not possible?" And so people answered one, yes or no, possible or not possible. And then what the data showed was that the people who thought that it was not possible got it wrong statistically more times than they should have got it wrong by chance. So there was something that was going on in their consciousness where they actually perceived what the correct answer was, but they deliberately, on a subconscious level, of course, got it wrong. So even the skeptics were having an effect.
Statistical, meaningful effects in their own sort of backwards way. Yeah.
Right.
So that's a great segue actually to talk about some of the impacts that came out of this. Out of the studies, there were just a tremendous number of factors that are at play here. Obviously, there's a lot of questions when you start unfolding or revealing the effects that you're looking at here. Well, what's happening? What's going on? What are the things that are affecting this? Right. And so a lot of the experiments were aimed at trying to uncover some of these things. Right. For example, natural questions. Do you get better results for people who've been doing this for a long time versus not? Do you get better results with men or women? Do you get better results if you're in the same room with the device, or if you are in the next room over, or in the next state over, or in the next country over? And what, so all these different parameters that are there that they looked at. And again, this is one of these things that we could absolutely spend not just the next hour, but the next week talking about all the different things that were there. I'll mention a couple of them that I'm going to touch on a little bit later. They're just to highlight, but again, it's so, I feel bad because there's so many interesting things that were there. But one of them, for example, I mentioned is, does it matter if you're next to the machine you're trying to affect or in the next room? And what they discovered unequivocally is distance has nothing to do with this. So you're going to get basically the same results whether you're sitting in front of the machine or you're sitting in literally around the world, across the world. Makes no difference. And so it's not a spatial thing. And it's not to say that there's nothing about distance, but that the meaningful distance here is not measured in meters, right? There's other ways of looking at distance: emotional distance, intellectual distance, community, the interconnectedness of what's going on is really what drives it. As a result of that, you would see different results. For example, if you had a single person trying to affect a system versus a pair of people, and it would be a different kind of effect if you had a pair of friends versus two people who were romantically involved and so forth. Lots of different effects here. The other one, which I think was particularly fascinating, was time. You sort of expect, if you just sort of had to take a guess, that if I was going to affect this system that's doing its thing, well, I'd have to try to do it while it's doing its thing. And what they found was, no, you don't. You can, for example, try to affect the system that is happening, that's going to run a week from now. And perhaps a little bit more startling to a lot of people is you can also have an effect on the system that ran a week ago. That time is actually also kind of irrelevant in the picture. But state of mind and what your expectations are makes a huge difference. So to Bill's point, people who believe that this is impossible find that they don't have any effect. But it probably is not because it's impossible. It's because they believe that it's impossible, and hence there really is no room for that possibility in their own cognitive makeup. Whereas people who weren't troubled by that had no problem having those effects. And obviously, when you start exploring this and you say, wait a minute, time doesn't really matter here. I can go backwards and forwards in time. You really have to start looking at, well, what kind of models would I need to put together to explain that? Quantum mechanics tends to be a really nice foundation for doing that. And that itself, well, how do you explain this through quantum mechanics, is another thing that could be an entire 4-hour, actually probably 4-month talk itself.
Jeff, could I stop you right there for just 1 minute to pause?
Okay.
If I remember correctly, they found that when two people are really in love, they had more of an effect on the project than a single person. And I also wanted to bring up that they replicated these experiments hundreds of times. It wasn't like they just did one isolated and then they moved to another group. They just kept doing this and doing this.
Yeah, certainly scientifically speaking, this is why I was mentioning that they weren't looking at finding one particular interesting moment in this. They were establishing a scientific basis, and that requires, as you described just now, that you have to do these things many, many times so that you're not looking at some aberrant situation, but you can show that it's a consistent effect that is happening.
And I'd like to point out one other thing.
Did it show that love effect that Siobhan was talking about? Did it show that if people were in love?
Yeah, for sure. There were so many different dimensions of this, as you can imagine. Certainly.
Well, the reason I mentioned that one is because it harkens back to what Dr. Nelson was saying last month, was that when they looked at their 20 years of data on the Global Consciousness Project, what they found was that when people were engaged in connection healing events like World Tai Chi and Qigong Day or the International Day of Peace or World Yoga Day or whatever, that the consciousness more powerfully affected than tragic events. And so, you know, we see that connection, that compassion, that love thing. And so I thought it was interesting that the data showed that, you know, if it was two people in love, that there was an effect that you got from that, because when we do these events, in a way, it's kind of a feeling of global love. And I've had many teachers and participants in World Tai Chi Day contact me, and they say, yeah, it just felt so different, you know, that day when we were doing it all together. You know, it felt different.
I'd also like to point out, if people are familiar with Dr. Larry Dossey's work, he's written a number of books, Healing Words, and it's very compatible to what Robert John and Brenda Dunne discovered in their laboratories, so that we have other people that are coming to similar conclusions. So Jeff, I'm sorry.
And then Dr. Dean Radden's work with when he was trying to follow up on Masaru Emoto's work, when they had people think blessing thoughts, it had a positive impact on the aesthetic beauty of the water crystals that were created. And again, that was non-local, like you were talking about earlier, Jeff, because they opened it up to be a planet-wide experience. And it didn't matter whether people were in Japan affecting water in California or whether they were right there next to it. You know, it's like they had it was non-local, or consciousness is non-local.
Jeff, you were bringing up quantum physics, so do you want to jump back to that?
Just casually bringing up quantum physics.
Just casually.
I mean, I think ultimately the point that I was getting to there was that there are a lot of different approaches that were made to understand this, and a lot of the studies that were in there can go a variety of directions. Obviously, though I was not planning on going into more quantum mechanics or anything to that effect, but when I was mentioning about time, and I don't know, this is another aspect of sort of physics that doesn't get a lot of airplay. A lot of people know about a concept called entropy, the idea that things are going to become in general, if you leave them to their own devices, are going to become more disordered. Things go from structured to sort of unstructured. This is the same principle as to why, in fact, physicists call it the arrow of time. This is why you can pour coffee into your, or I should say, pour cream into your coffee, but getting the cream out of your coffee is a really challenging thing to do. This is an entropic problem. There is a complementary aspect to that called centropy, which looks at the universe a different way. So where entropy is about things going from ordered states to disordered states, the equations of physics that talk about that result in energy and information that propagate forward in time. Centropy is the complement, and that is to say, things, rather than looking at it as things happening as a cause, it's because there's a future purpose towards which things move. And that is a very different way of looking at it, right? Because that results in information and energy flowing backward in time. But where it was originally sort of dismissed as one of those pesky negative signs under the square root, it must be a mathematical artifact, there's a lot of new research that's been enabled by modern technology that shows that these kinds of things actually do happen, that studies have been able to measure this in very careful ways. And it explains and a lot of these effects that we were talking about before. Well, how is it that you can affect something that happened in the past? Well, if energy and information can flow backward, then you really don't have a problem with that. But it does say that you've got to take a sort of a new look at how we think about the universe around us. And when PAIR closed, or was, I should say, when it was sort of edging towards that, and Bob and Brenda were getting ready to retire, what they did is they established ICRL, which, if I point in the right direction with the right finger, hopefully is like there on my screen. The International Consciousness Research Laboratories is a not-for-profit organization, you know, your standard 501c3 thing, to continue on that work. And that's the organization that sort of is in existence now. That's what I am now running as sort of the air to it. Bob passed away a number of years ago, and Brenda passed away last year. So I've been sort of handed the reins, as it were. And what ICRL aims to do is to take the work that was done at PAIR as a foundation, and then continue that path forward in a variety of ways. So, for example, one of those is to make people aware of what the research is and what the implications are, and to help people understand that better. We do a variety of different things in that respect in terms of holding talks, publishing books, and so forth. We also continue on the research. We do some really interesting things. Projects that are going on right now involve doing measurements of moment of death experiences, which have been showing some just incredible results of REGs that become incredibly structured data series that should be completely random, that become incredibly structured at the moment of death. We're doing an upcoming one this June on out-of-body experiences. We've done things with animals. Bees was a really neat project looking at the swarming effects and so forth. Anyway, we continue to do research, and we find new ways of reaching out. One of the things that is really central for ICRL is asking ourselves, how do we get the understanding behind this into the minds of as young a person as we possibly can? And it was really this driver that caught my attention about what you folks here are trying to do with World Qigong Day and Tai Chi, and getting this into schools, because it's so central to this. The earlier you can get people to understand what these impacts are and the possibilities are, the more powerful all of this can be. And so that's really a central piece of what ICRL is focused on. And I think the message, and there are a lot of messages. I mean, I've just been talking for the last 20 minutes about different messages. The message, if I had to say that there was one that was really central to all of this, is that if you really can't get around the fact that we are an interconnected whole, right? And this goes to the question of, well, does love have anything to do with this? And well, yeah, it doesn't just have anything to do with this. This has everything to do with this. That's sort of the heart of interconnectedness. And when I say interconnectedness, that it's not solely human to human interconnectedness, but an interconnectedness with any person or what have you, to everything else. And that's what those experiments were actually demonstrating when you get down to it. Because the people who were running those experiments, who were making those attempts, if you ask them, well, what did you try to do? Did you insist? Did you try to demand it? Did you make wild hand gestures or whatever? How'd you get more balls to go to the left than went to the right? How'd you get more heads than tails? How'd you do this, that, or the other? What everybody ultimately came back with said, the thing that worked for me the best was when I got out of the idea that I was a wholly separate entity from the machine, where I established the connection that allowed us to work as a team, as a pair, as something in coherence with each other, right? Far better than staring at a machine and trying to enforce your will upon it, was to try to reach out and become one with the machine as much as you possibly could. And through that connection, have the influence that you wanted. Not because you're forcing the machine to do it, because you as the machine are making a decision to do it, right? And if I'm saying, as I say this last couple of sentences, right, think about your experiences with Tai Chi or Qigong or meditation, and go down the list. Sounds kind of familiar, right? Between breaking down the boundaries between what is yourself and what is not yourself, and using that connection in some healthy, productive way. And that's really, that interconnectedness is sort of the spirit behind everything that we're going to be looking to do moving forward. It sounded like somebody had a question or something. I didn't want to blow past it. Nope. Okay. And I think one of the things that we have to face in this, right? If you look at this, say, okay, well, we are an interconnected whole, right? All these pieces that are together. One of maybe the most important consequence that comes out of this is that ultimately, we're going to have to take on a different way of looking at our role in the universe. And that means taking on a little bit more responsibility for everything that is going on right now. Obviously, when a state of mind has a tremendous amount to do with the life that you live in a variety of different ways, right? There's simply an internally focused way of looking at that. If I am, for example, ready to be accepting and open, I'm going to interpret the comments that somebody says to me in a very different way than if I'm looking for an argument, right? Same comments, different experience. And that's one aspect of this. But what the pair research showed is that it definitely goes beyond our own internal experience and interpretation, but that we really do change the world around us. So it's not just a question, and I don't say that to downplay the importance of how we feel or how the life that we live as a result of our state of mind. But the point being that our positive intentions can have an effect around the world, independent of, even if we don't necessarily have a direct experience with it, that can be making a difference. And this is not, again, something that's terribly surprising. Bill has talked, for example, about studies that have looked at the effect of having more meditators, right? And what the effect is on other people, not just the meditators, but the fact that there are more meditators meditating right now can make a difference for everybody's health, not just the health of the people who are doing the meditating.
Jeff, one of the things that we discovered as we were getting into the research was that, over the last 40 years, that's when mind-body practices have spread around the planet like a wildfire. Just the last 40 years, really the Beatles kind of, when they went to India with the Maharishi, that really kind of lit the fuse. And then it took a couple decades for it to really take root. But over the last 40 years, mind-body practices have just gone up like that across the planet. And we came across some really fascinating data. And over that same 40-year period, violent crime rates have dropped precipitously at near 40-year lows, not just in the United States, but according to UN data, crime data in many countries around the world. Mm-hmm. And I always bring this up in my seminars because most people think that the world is just vastly more violent than it's ever been before in human history, and the data doesn't show that. It's right. The media, they if it bleeds, it leads. So they keep people are kind of in a constant state of fear and trepidation of the people around them if they're immersed in the media. But when we practice these mind-body practices, we go into that connective state. And I also learned that the connection part of our body, the part or brain, the part that makes us feel more connected, that it actually becomes more active when we practice mind-body practices. And the part that that is responsible for feelings of isolation becomes less active.
Yeah, absolutely. The on that topic, I think a lot of people also, at this sort of in this day and age with social media and the role of the internet in terms of the communications that people are having and corresponding, as many people feel, with a sense of isolation, right? Which is almost the opposite of what people expected. I've got the internet, I can talk with anybody in the world. Everybody is going to feel more connected, and yet that's not what we've seen. There's been a lot of disconnect, and of course, part of that is you're not entirely sure who you're talking to, or even if you're talking to a person. Right now, the AI systems have gotten very, very good, alarmingly good. If you stay on top of it. If you haven't gone off and played with the ChatGPT or some similar large language model, and you really don't want to sleep well, I recommend you give it a try, because you're gonna be astounded at the capabilities that exist right now. But there are, fortunately, other tools that are out there that uncover or demonstrate that there is something that's going on a human-to-human connection that isn't replaceable. It's a real thing that is only there when you're making a meaningful connection with somebody else. One of the neat sets of tools that have been developed and people are using, although I don't think it's known as well as it should be, is called authentic relating. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a series of tools that are designed to help people develop skills, listening skills, communication in general, right? How do you share? How do you listen? And how do you make that most effective to build solid relationships of any kind? So it could be romantic relationships, which is probably when you think of authentic relating, you're thinking about romantic situations, but that's not, yes, one of just the infinite numbers of relationships that can be there, whether you're talking about with your family, at work, with colleagues, or frankly, just sitting at a bus stop, if anybody still does that. There are skills that we as humans can learn, and they're not hard. They're actually very approachable skills that can combat those feelings of isolation. I think a lot of the hope that I feel for the future of humanity is going to come about from a combination of learning how to do those kinds of things effectively and having the confidence to recognize that what people are talking about, what people are feeling in terms of this interconnectedness is real, right? And that the things that they're feeling are real. So for example, most people, and when I say most, I'm talking 95%, right? Most people have had an experience that cannot be explained through classical physics. That sense that something's happening to this person I care about, and I really should call them now. And then they find out, yeah, something was really happening. Or Sheldrake, Rupert Sheldrake, you know, it was sort of the main name that made this comment with this. I have a feeling that somebody's looking at me, right? But most people at some time have had the sense that somebody was staring at them and then turned around to discover that somebody was staring at them. That's not how physics works, right? Light doesn't come from the eyes, physics come from the eyes and put pressure on your back. You shouldn't be able to sense that in the traditional optics way, but most people have, right? When you sit down in quiet conversations in the security of safe spaces, and you say, what's happened in your life? Most people say, yeah, I've had an experience like that, or at least I've known somebody who's had an experience like that, and I believe them. But it's very uncomfortable for people to talk about that just out of the blue, right? You need to feel safe to do that. And that's a very interesting thing, that most people have had this experience, and yet most people are very uncomfortable to talk about it. You know, one of the things that I've discovered, having now become much more of an accessible person in the context of ICRL, is the number of emails that I get from people who've had these things and say, please tell me that I'm not insane. Like, you're not insane. This is happening to everybody. This is not a strange or abnormal thing. This is in fact extremely normal, even though there are some small number of people who are very vocal about saying that it's not. The truth is almost everybody has had some experience like this that says that it's legit. So the question then is, how do you make people feel comfortable with doing this? And I think there's a couple of different answers to how you go about that. And it certainly starts with getting the education as young as absolutely possible, so that people don't build up their own personal barriers to it without ever giving themselves a chance to establish or to evaluate the legitimacy of it.
Yeah, that's why we wanted to. That's why the Global Transformation Project's petition to the UN starts at kindergarten, because we wanted to get at least those 2 formative years, 5 to 7, because so much happens in those formative years. Yep.
Now for us in ICRL, we're doing this in a variety of different ways. Historically, so we as ICRL, we've published 19 books that are out and available, and we have a 20th that's coming out like in the next few days. And
we should start listing these books at globaltransformationproject.org, because people need to be more aware of this science.
Yeah. So one of the books, and I'll say the first book that ICRL published, and it was actually originally published by Harcourt Brace. This was back in the 1990s. It's called Margins of Reality, and it was a technically oriented book that reported on all of the work that Per was doing and the findings that it had. One of the things that was in there, in addition, so I'll tell you up front, it's not an easy read. Now at the time that I was reading it, I had just turned 23, something like that. And, so I would sit down and I'd go through the book, and it wasn't so much the technical that I found that made it a difficult read, but more that I would read a sentence and I'd go, oh my gosh. And then my mind would go just following the implications of that sentence. And then I would realize that my eyes had gone down the page and I hadn't read any of that. So I'd have to go back and read the second sentence and go back and so forth. So it's a very conceptually dense book. There's just a ton of fascinating kind of world revising ideas that are in it. And I mention some of the content in here for two reasons. One, just to mention that if you're interested in the science that was done and the results, to see like the specifics, okay, here's the charts that show this, they're in the book. But second, one of the things that is also included in that book is a tremendous number of quotes from founders of modern science, sort of the quantum mechanics, modern physics, new establishment, that recognize that consciousness is a key player in all of this. And so these are names that you don't normally hear quotes from Schrodinger or Pauli or Einstein or Dirac or although those are the physicists, but they were all talking consciousness. And Margins of Reality did a wonderful job of pulling together just an incredible array of quotes from all these people, showing that they were thinking about this stuff. Now, Margins was, like I said, it's pretty intense book. There's several others that were written over the following 15 years or so. The Source of Reality, Being in Biology, there are just a ton of these, and you can find them on the ICRO website, so I'm not going to list them all, but they're all nonfiction. They're all reporting on specific data from a variety of different angles, some very hardcore science, some from the experiential aspect of running the Pear Lab and so forth. Over the last couple of years, since I really have been running things at ICRL, I have been pushing more and more to expand the aperture of the kinds of materials that we're publishing. And as a starting point for that, I actually wrote a book that talks to a lot of these ideas, but does it without the science feeling of the book. In fact, it's not a science book at all. It's a novel. It's called Nexus, and it is a sort of advertised as science fiction, which it is. I take science and I sort of push it a little bit over the edge of where things are in terms of science, on the concept of centropy, which I mentioned before, is the idea of things heading towards a future purpose. And through that book, the idea is to let people read this in a very non-threatening way. So you can get lost in the story and appreciate, sort of at the, maybe even a subconscious level, the kinds of ideas about what would it mean if, instead of this very balanced society that we live in, and if you think about it, right, our world is very, very off balance. We have a tremendous respect for yang kinds of principles. We have almost no respect for yin as an overall society. The gender imbalance is blaringly obvious. All of these different aspects. And what this book does is it paints that picture very clearly, right? So it's a book about two worlds, ours, and then the complement to it. So you can see what does ours look like with its dynamic focus, with its yang mentality and patriarchal system of fractured countries, and then put it in contrast to this parallel world that is yin focused, that is a unified society, that is matriarchal. And how do these worlds differ, and how do they ultimately, could they come together, and what would a solution where they work in harmony with each other look like, as opposed to working against each other, which is sort of the whole thing. But it's not written as a scientific treatment of it. It's written as a story with characters that you can get into and so forth. So that's a different way of reaching out to kids. And by kids, I really mean anyone between the ages of 0 and old, whatever that looks like.
Well, yeah, the paradigm that you painted with your novel, we were talking earlier, and I mentioned that I had written a novel called 2012, The Awakening, and I didn't intend it to have anything to do with the Mayan prophecies, But after I wrote it, I took it to the editor, and the editor was reading it, and she just thought that I must be an authority on the Mayan prophecies because she started telling me about it. And I got curious then, and so I started looking into it. But what I discovered was that this alignment that happened in 2012, this cosmic alignment that the ancient Mayans predicted, they called it the opening of the birth canal of the cosmic mother. So Hollywood made it look like it was the end of the world, but really what they were talking about was a new way of doing things. We were going into a new way of proceeding. And so in the novel, the character is a woman, and I know the heroine in your novel is a woman as well from talking. But anyway, she talks about this opening of the birth canal of the cosmic mother, and the way that this character describes it is, she said, you know, the way that the planet has been for the last 2,000 years, the Piscean age, if you want to term it that way, it's been this yang masculine development of the planet where people have gone out, they've explored, they've claimed it, they've conquered it, they've exploited it. And that's what, you know, physically connected the whole planet, was that 2,000 years. But now we're entering an age where the planet is populated, and we have to figure out, how do we all survive on this, you know, increasingly crowded planet. And so this new opening of the birth canal of the cosmic mother, or the new time that we're going into, she describes as a time when if we go to a kitchen cabinet or a larder in the yang, or the, you know, the past way that humanity's done things, we would stick a flag in things and we would go, this is mine. But this new way is this, you were talking about a feminine way. And in Tai Chi and Qigong, we understand that that's not about sex. It's about our approach to things. It's yin and yang. And so everybody has feminine and masculine qualities. It's an amorphous, shifting thing. But the yin way is to go to that cabinet, and instead of sticking a flag in things and claiming them, we open the cabinet and we look at the larder, and we try to figure out how we can use the contents of that cabinet to nurture the whole family, the whole household. In this case, we're talking about the whole planet. And so it just feels like that's the moment that we're at in human history, is moving towards just what your novel was.
Well, and I think there's a lot of different levels of consciousness, right, that you can envision, down from the most individual cell-like consciousness through sort of the collective consciousness as it builds up, collective to a person, collective to a society, collective to the world, to the universe. And I think there is a level of this at sort of a higher level of this, you know, where as a society, as a species, we're starting to recognize that if we don't respect this, we may be headed towards extinction, right? You know, we're doing a lot of things. I get into a lot of talks about global warming and what have you, right? And people are like, oh, we're going to destroy the planet. It's mostly we're going to destroy ourselves. Right, the planet's still going to be orbiting the sun, and in another 100 million years or whatever it is, there's probably going to be fine. We're going to get another species showing up, and as far as the planet's concerned, it's poof, like all right, get rid of the apes, let's move on, right? But for us, there's sort of a more dire mortality that we could be facing here, and I think at these higher levels, the sort of species level consciousness, we may be recognizing that we're in danger, and we need to get this pushed down into the minds of the people who are going to be making a difference for that. Because and just real quick, and then let's say that. Sure. And one of the reasons I feel that way is because I notice quite a different attitude on these sorts of things from people who are younger. When I speak to folks who are in their teens or in their 20s, it's a very different mindset than sort of your whatever it means to be an average middle-aged person, right? If there is such a thing, but people are looking at it differently. So I think there is something that's there's potential there. Sorry, I
right
just
in line with
my mouse.
No, this is so. It's so right in line with what you're talking about, David. That's why I wanted to mention it. But one of the studies that really caught my attention was that they found that when we go into what the researchers referred to as a gratitude state, and so that gratitude state, it's like that heart-brain coherence that Dr. McCratty and Heart Math Institute talk about. When we go into these meditative states, we create that brain-heart coherence where we're feeling things rather than just intellectually thinking about things. And all these mind-body practices support that, you know, the flow in Tai Chi and Qigong. And so what they found in the study was that when we go into a gratitude state where we're really experiencing the pleasure of our existence, we're present, then when we're in that gratitude state, it has a very healing effect. It actually changes the molecular structure of the brain and the heart. And so, you know, with all the science that you're talking about and the other scientists that we've talked about or talking to, we now know, you know, through World Tai Chi Qigong Day and the Global Consciousness Project, we now know that when we go into consciousness states, it permeates the entire planet. And I've just come to realize through my own practice, because when I go into, you know, that gratitude state where I just let the pineal gland let go and I just become this field of experience flowing through, and then it's like I'm feeling my body being massaged and loosened and, you know, feeling the joy of existence. And then that's how I teach in the classes as well. It's just all bringing home to me with all the science is that the way that we're going to save the planet isn't by changing people's minds intellectually as much as it is we're going to, you know, love and appreciate this planet into becoming, you know, the research shows that meditators are much more effective at actualizing the lives that they envision enjoying than non-meditators. Right. And so we start to see that we're creating this future that we're going into, and mind-body people are right at the core of this.
I think there's CJ, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, CJ, you're muted. You're
CJ.
muted, CJ. You're muted.
I have to break in here. Sorry about that. Hold on. We need to ensure that we give people a break, and I think we need to ensure that that Dr. Dunne has a little bit more time to finish what he was talking about, because we only got some of that. What we're going to do is we're going to take like a very short, first, and some people are now needing to leave, so we're going to get a group picture, which is only going to take a minute, and then we're going to take a 3-minute break, and then we're going to come back and let Dr. Dunne finish his presentation, and we're going to kind of, unfortunately, I forgot to turn off the chat, so people were chatting with each other. We're going to turn off the chat so that you can only chat to host, and that'll stop it'll popping up. So if everyone could put your videos on, so that we can take a group picture, and then we will remove the spotlight for the two and go back to a gallery view of everyone. So if you want to put on your gallery view, and everyone just put on your video.
Gallery view.
I have to put my gallery view on.
Okay. There we are.
Okay, why can't I get a review on? I do not know.
Hey, Barb.
Am I still?
It's on for me, if that helps. I see everyone's in.
Hold on.
Hey, Roger.
Okay, there it is. Okay, so everyone turn on your video if you could, please. So we'll give everyone a moment.
Risa, Tanya, Zia, Shaka, turn on your video. Donna, Cynthia, Sandra, Jamie, Jan, Douglas, Ben.
So come on, turn on your video, and then we can get a picture of everyone who's on our call.
Yeah, we're going to open it up for comments and questions as well. We'll have time. Make sure we have plenty of time for that this time.
Shall we all say chi?
Yeah, let's say chi. Or somebody going to count?
Well, first we have to. I'm
Well, we're all
not getting
muted,
very
so
many
we can say
videos
whatever
yet.
we want, really.
Oh, we're trying to get Douglas, Ben, Daisuke, Jamie, Shaka, Cynthia, Donna, Risa, Tanya, to turn on your videos.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy.
And Siobhan, because my internet is so poor,
Yes.
could you take the picture?
Okay, give me a second to figure this out. Okay, how do I take the picture? I'm sorry.
You get everyone on your screen,
I do. Okay.
and then you hit Control Print Screen.
Oh,
It's a key on your keyboard.
okay. Everybody ready to say chi?
Yeah.
Chi.
Cheese.
Okay. All right. Now there's three.
Page 2.
There's 3 pages, CJ. So do I go to the next one and hit print
Yeah,
screen?
go to the next one.
Okay, on the second page, there's nobody. There we go. Come on, people, put your videos on. Tanya
Okay,
Reese.
Cecilia, Tybee, Shirley, Anna Marie, Davida, Ed, Daisuke, Ben, Douglas. You guys can turn on your cameras. Be great.
Okay, I'm gonna take a
Can we chant
picture.
to them?
Yeah, we can chant to them. We can all send our conscious waves to them.
Yeah.
My camera is on.
All right, I think
Oh, I don't
I
know.
think we've made a good faith effort to get as many people as we can.
Okay.
So now we're gonna take the little bit of break. So everyone can take a break, and I am to again remind you all that this is a donation based, yet donated. Please go to the website and that was listed, and we're going to put that website in the chat so you can just click on it. And then we will have Dr. Dunne be able to finish his presentation.
CJ, two questions. When can people start asking Dr. Jeff Dunne questions? After the break?
Well,
or-
I think we have to wait until Dr. Dunne, about how you need for your full presentation.
So I think just thinking through, there were a couple of different points I wanted to make. One was relatively quick. In fact, it's probably faster to just say that one right now, which is, sometimes I do get people asking, well, how do I get involved in this sort of thing? And I just want to open up that invitation that the answer is get in contact. Go to icrl.org and you can contact us. There's lots of opportunities to get involved in a lot of different ways. So that was one. So that's done now. So I don't need to do that.
And we'll put that link up at globaltransformationproject.org as well.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Page.
And the other one, I think, it's worth talking for a little bit about the implications of all of this on the nature of consciousness and what is it and what isn't it. Because there have been, as a result of the work that's done, and in fact, it's not just work at PAIR, it's work around the world. There's some really fascinating stuff that speaks to what is the nature of consciousness. And I felt it was worth talking a little bit about that because it does connect into Tai Chi and Qigong and the nature of Qi and how all this stuff comes together. So I wanted
Well,
to
why don't we take the break and then you can pick up right there, Jeff. And then once you complete that, then we'll open it up so that everybody can, ask questions and make comments and things like that.
and I'm glad
So let's do about 10 more minutes, present for 10 more minutes, and then we'll open up to questions.
After
And
the
when
break,
we do
right.
open up to questions, hopefully everyone, you know how to use your reactions, because what we'll do is we'll ask you to click on the hand to raise your hand using the reactions. That way we can keep track of who,
Now, how do you get to that? How do you get to that? I don't see how to do that. I don't see how to get the
You
hand.
hover to the bottom of your screen of your Zoom meeting and click on it. Usually it just says react.
Yeah, mine doesn't have
when you
react.
click on reactions, it'll say raise hand.
I see it. I see it.
See, that's raise hand.
Okay.
And then once you've raised your hand, then you can your hand.
Okay.
And we can easily see who has raised their hand. So I can see that Dazuki Uria, pronouncing that right. So and you can lower it now, but when we come back, then we will be able to do
Okay,
that.
so we're gonna take a quick break, and then I'm really anxious to hear your summary, Jeff. This sounds very interesting, and then we'll be able to open it up for everybody's questions and comments.
Perfect.
Okay, and that quick
I'm
break is now 5:10. So we are going to be back by 5:14. We're going to start again at 5:14, no later.
CJ, do I stop record now?
Yeah, you can stop the recording now and we'll put it back on again in a minute.
Okay, we're good.
All right, there we go. Do we want to step back?
Please, if you could take it from the top. Yeah. Sorry.
I love your confidence that I would remember what the topic is that I'm going to try. So I had mentioned that there are a variety of different things that are going on in if people are interested in learning about science and consciousness, becoming more active in this, and gave one example being a science and consciousness workshop that is now going into its third year in November at a place called the Broughton Sanctuary up in northern England is a great opportunity, but that there are lots of different places and opportunities to do that. Another one, which is something that ICRL is focused on, is a series of workshops and events to try to get our arms around the language that we use to talk about consciousness. To give you an example of this, the idea, and I guess I should say that I became aware of the criticality of this at a conference that I was at in, I think it was like 2016, 2015, somewhere around there, where I was listening to somebody who got up and they had a phenomenal talk about science and consciousness and religion, and they spoke for about 35 minutes, and I spent the whole time looking around the room and became immediately aware that there were no two people in that conference room that had the slightest idea what that person was talking about or had a common understanding of what actually just transpired, that the language was an incredible barrier. Everybody has their own definition of consciousness, of religion, of spirituality, and you name it. So this is another area that opportunity for getting involved is to try to help establish some kind of Rosetta Stone so people can understand when you say consciousness, are you talking about the same thing that when I say consciousness, and so forth? Because I assure you that if you talk to a Tibetan monk and a neurosurgeon, their idea of consciousness is very unlikely to be the same. People
unless it's Eben Alexander, maybe.
Well, that's why I say it's very unlikely. It's possible. It's possible. Yes, the nature of consciousness, as you try to put the explanations together for how do these sorts of things work, how is it possible that the data that Per collected could have happened? One of the things that is just unavoidable is the conclusion that consciousness is not a thing that sits in the brain. It is much more likely that the brain is something of a transmitter or a transducer to something that is far less physical. And there's a lot of evidence that consciousness is a sort of a layered thing, that there isn't a distinct, there's the consciousness of the species over there and the consciousness of the human over here, but they're different. Right. The evidence is sort of overwhelming as you continue to pour through this, that the consciousness of a cell is a contributor and a benefactor and a recipient from the consciousness that is a larger system, right? A person, and that person's a part of a consciousness that is contributing to and receiving from bigger consciousness scopes and so forth. And I think that's a really important aspect for us in this particular context when we think about what we're trying to do with raising the awareness of the benefit of Qigong, of mindfulness, and all these sorts of things. Because when we talk to kids, or to be honest, when we talk to anybody, trying to avoid the language that gets that's automatically inserted because of the way that we've been brought up becomes really important. There's there are cases that when you look at them, it simply isn't possible that consciousness is just, well, the brain's wiring the way that it is, and therefore that's the end of it. Certainly my personal favorite story is, and you would think of being my favorite story to remember the name of the kid, and I can't. The kid who was many years ago, born with incredible memories of being a fighter pilot in World War II, to the point that he could remember names, he could remember all kinds of things. There's just no possible way that kid experienced. And yet when they went through and they identified, they followed it through and talked to people and went, oh, oh, these are real memories. These are real things that he's tuning into. It's hard to imagine that we as the biological, you know, like gushy carbon things are that's the end of the story, right? There's got to be more to that. Cases where people have medical situations that are presumably irreversible that reverse things that right. There's so many examples of this that it's really almost impossible to convince yourself at that point that there's any legitimacy anymore to the idea that consciousness is just sort of like an illusion that comes because neurons are firing in a particular way, and much more about looking at this from a bigger picture where the idea of the brain and the way we think about memory and so forth, it's just one way of describing something that's far larger, far more complex, or alternately said, far simpler than we typically try to treat it. And I think that's, you know, to me, that's just an incredibly powerful message that comes out of this, because this is now a message that results from scientific measurement, right? It's not like this is a new idea. People have had these ideas for tens of thousands of years, if not more, right? But the thing that's really exciting about it in the context of pair is you've now have a set of data that you can point to and say, look, this cannot happen some other way. And it's not anecdotal, it's repeated. It's, you know, anyway, so I think that's a very exciting part of what came out of pair, and it's something that ICRL is very, it's very central to what we want to continue to share with the rest of the world. So laying that out there as a fertile starting point for questions, let me be quiet here and give people some time to ask.
Jeff, I know Dr. Jia had raised her hand earlier, so hopefully we can go to her. But one thing I just wanted to share with you, I think it was James Goddard from the Goddard Space Center. He said that it was like a joke that he told, and he said science is climbing this mountain of understanding the reality of our beingness and our consciousness, and eventually we'll get to the precipice of that mountain, and we'll look down, and sitting there will be the mystics, and they'll be saying, "What took you so long?" but
you know, there's it does. One of the conclusions that you get out of this is, you know, you ask, well, why all these principles work, and you know, the mathematics being so pure and abstracted and so forth, and all so many things, and what is it that we're actually discovering in all of this when we have independent people going through their studies and coming to similar conclusions like that, right? And it's just distinctly possible that what we're discovering in all of this ultimately is ourselves, right? The universe has the structure that it has because we're the ones establishing the structure on it, the way that we interpret it. And you get that message at this point from anywhere from some people who are focused on modern physics to Carlos Castaneda at the other end of the spectrum, right? Like there's just so many angles that are starting to converge and say, look, what we're studying here is as much, if not more, if not all, aspects of our own organizational constructs, the way that consciousness deals with itself and with the other aspects of consciousness that are connected to it. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
It's really an extraordinary time to be alive, to see, you know, like you said, these things are coming together. Yeah. And I mean, if I was going to pick a point in history where I'd want to be here to witness it, this is where I'd want to be, right where we are right now.
Would people please raise their hands?
Now, I know Dr. Xia.
Okay, we'll put her on next.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention something. We just started communicating recently, but Dr. Xia, she has been teaching in public schools, teaching Tai Chi and Qigong in public schools, and also for, I think, troubled teens or kids that were in trouble. Maybe you can let us know about that.
Could you unmute yourself?
Oh, yeah, you're
Dr.
muted.
Z? There you go.
There you go.
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon. Nice to meet everybody. We just had the PE class in the local public school, like Woodside Elementary, where I had a very good experience over there.
Now you also did. You said you did classes with troubled youth or youth that were in trouble or something.
It is children detention, local children detention program. Yeah, juvenile court. Yes, had a very good result over there.
Oh, that's encouraging.
Yeah. We had a couple of folks who were teaching in at various levels. In fact, one of I would say one of the most valuable memories that my mother had was when they would have young kids, young classes of elementary school kids come into the Paralab and learn about what they were doing there and have a chance to practice with the machines and have an effect. And they're really good at it because they haven't learned that they can't be good at it. So they're really good at it. And some of the people who have taken it out into classrooms have said that they've just had tremendous results in the way kids have responded to it. One teacher did some really cool stuff with having kids design experiments and carry them out. It was amazing.
One of the things, yeah, in my new second edition of the Gospel of Science, one of the things that I talk about is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a headband, a brain censoring headband. It's called Muse. There's probably more brands, but that's the one I'm familiar with. And then it syncs with your phone. And when you go into alpha state, when you're in busy beta brainwave state, you hear rain falling like you're in a rainforest. And then when you go into alpha state, it takes you through relaxation suggestions. And when you go into alpha state, then the rain goes away and it's silent. And then if you go deeper into alpha theta, then you hear birds chirping, and then you go, wow, I'm a really good meditator. And then the rain starts falling again because your brain got busy thinking how good you are. And so we've thought that, this could be very applicable to education.
Yeah.
So the educators would know if they're having an effective mind-body program. And I bet the kids would be really good at it.
Yeah.
I bet they'd be really good
and interesting with the awareness, the self-awareness. Earlier, I think Siobhan had mentioned it, but maybe it was you, about what kind of different effects did you have, matched pairs of people and so forth. The one thing that was consistent amongst basically every operator who ever did experiments was what they called the series position effect, which is a technical term for a very interesting little phenomenon, which is the very first time that somebody would sit down in front of one of these devices, they would almost always have an incredible response, like just off the charts, statistically significant. And they would get really excited and go, I know what I'm doing. I've got it. And then gone, right? The next run would get nothing. And then it would take a little bit you'd do it again and do it again. And then the effect would come back. But it only happened in that space of humility where you didn't assume that you were the whatever, right? Like you had to have that humility with you, and it was just everybody had that effect. The first one, boom, and then the second one. I just saw your mother talk about this very same thing in a Thinking Aloud interview. I was watching it on YouTube earlier today, and that happened to me. The first time that I did Neigong meditation in a class, I had no idea what it was. I had no idea what any of this stuff was, I grew up in Western Kansas, a small farm town, and I just happened to move to California and take this class. And that first class, man, I just went to Alpha Centauri. I mean, it was just the most incredible experience. And then after that, I couldn't do it because, my brain went into that mode of thinking, oh yeah, I'll be able to do this every time, and then it just, your brain got in the way. And I asked my teacher about it. I said, this is, I had this great experience the first night. And she said, Bill, that was a gift. She said, now you're going through the process of learning how to get back to that. And it's that, letting go of the I and the me. And one of the things that I've often thought about was, the fractal nature of the universe, the self-replicating reality. And when I learned, that when there was conscious awareness of a particle going through slits, it behaved like a particle, like an individual entity. But then when there was nobody observing it, then it behaved like a wave, like it was part of an ocean of everything. And I started to realize, that when that pineal gland lets go in the center of the brain,
when that pineal gland lets go, when we let go of control, I, me thinking, and we just let ourselves just kind of be in that open drifting kind of moment that happens when the pineal gland center of the brain lets go. It's like we go from being a particle to a wave. That's when we're connected to everything. And so I just, that was kind of a realization that I had, that fractal nature of the universe. It happens at a subatomic level and on a level of our beingness and consciousness.
Yeah.
And we could
CJ.
bring that into meditation of not having attachment. We're not
Mhm.
attached to the
Mhm.
outcome. Dr. CJ Rhodes has a question.
First of all, Dr. Dunne, I do want to say how much I appreciate your talk. This is all fascinating. I want to ask you about this phenomena that you just talked about, which I personally experienced when I went to Franklin Institute. They had this massive you could call it a hockey rink, where they had these little things that you put this brainwave thing on, and you thought at the item, and you tried to get it to go to the other side, and it was kind of like a competition where you were trying to get it to go to the other side, and the other people on the other side were trying to move it. And of course, this is without touching it. This is just with your brain that you're thinking through. And the idea was you were supposed to be very, very calm and relaxed to be able to get it to move. And so because of my years of Tai Chi, I think initially I had this really, really cool, I won every time. Nobody else could beat me on this thing because I was really relaxed. Until the next day I went back to do the same thing and I lost every time. So it's like, well, I thought I had it. I thought I understood how this worked. And then suddenly whatever I was doing the previous day didn't work. Why is that? Do you have any explanation for this phenomena?
There's a couple of different answers that I wish I could say at the same time. There's nothing that gets in the way of being effective more than ego. Because what ego does to us is it wraps us into ourselves, and then you kind of lose the connection to everything else, because it really does. It becomes all about me. It's me, and right, and then all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what anybody else does, because I'm just seeing. I've stopped connecting with anything else, right? And so you've broken all the meaningful connections in that. So figuring out how to maintain a certain level of humility is central. And then sort of a similar way of saying the same thing, but in different language. It's something that I used to suffer with tremendously. I probably still suffer with it. I'm not as much, or I don't realize it, or whatever. But in fact, it was something that Bob John said to me early on in my life when I was a kid. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, right? It took 30 years for me to get what he was talking about. He said, yeah, Jeff will go places as soon as he gets out of his own way. Like, but what does that mean? Well, eventually I figured out what that meant, right? And sure enough, he was right. Or I don't know if I'm going places, but I certainly am less in my way than I was before. And I think that's part of it. It really does. It changes the focus of what you're trying to do, and it inhibits when that ego gets in the way. When you're hyper focused on yourself, you really have done that at the expense of disconnecting from all the things that are not you or a greater you. And I think that's really what's going on in those kinds of things, because same kind of thing. Oh, I think I've got it figured out. I think I'm in control of this, as opposed to I'm part of a system that's evolving the way that system's supposed to evolve.
Well, after playing with the Muse, and I'd been meditating for like 30 years before one of my students bought that for me. But when I started using the Muse and I had that instant feedback, it was like I started realizing, what it felt like. And it was like letting that pineal gland, that control consciousness right in the center of the brain let go, in order to go into alpha state, where you just are kind of omnipresent, but not singularly focused. When that pineal gland center of the brain lets go, it's like, that's when we so it's like we have to let go of the I and the me in order to achieve alpha state. So I think if we were teaching this to kids, we wouldn't really have to be teaching them a lot about, not being self-centered and stuff like that, because their brains would just be practicing, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That
you
experience.
can see it going a variety of ways in that. Laura, you had a question.
But we do find that when people meditate on a regular basis, it increases the empathy and compassion parts of their brain, and it decreases the size of the fear and stress parts of their brain. So these are, just going into the state of, non-singularity seems to have effects that we think we have to teach people spiritually, but we don't really, I don't think. I think what we need to do is just help kids keep in touch with that, because they're there when they're young. Kids are very, very compassionate, from my experience, and the research shows it as well.
Bill,
So,
we
yeah.
have
Thanks, Bill.
Laura that wants to ask a question.
yeah, please do. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
In my experience with Ashaya's Ascension, which is a consciousness expansion and stress release technique, I've noticed that when I'm doing, I don't get to that quote state, right? But when I'm just being, and I just wanted to say, Dr. Shea is such an amazing Tai Chi teacher. I just so appreciate your class. What she teaches us is no force, which is to me more like the state of being than the state of doing. And I just wondered, I've been kind of in and out here, but I wondered if you would talk about doing versus being just a little bit.
Yeah. So this is an incredibly important piece of this whole puzzle. For a long time, I've tried to find a really good model to explain how certain things could happen that didn't make a lot of sense, sort of in a logic sense. And I'll give you an example. When you're sitting in front of a random event generator, say, I want it to go high. So I want more ones than zeros. And that's what it comes down to. And it goes high, right? Like, this is a real thing. It's happening. Now, what people generally wouldn't know, nobody really knows, because you got to dive into the details of how you engineer random noise sources and all the rest of that, and avoid systematic bias and all that. What's really happening in that random event generator is it's matching it up on a set of 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, and you get a 1 when you match up the 1 with the 1 or the 0 with the 0, and you don't the other way. It's an incredibly complex process. There's no way anybody thought through and said, all right, I want the 1, I want the 0. Now I want the 1 that was 0. Nobody's doing that, right? It's not like that. And so the difference is, how you explain that. The doing way of thinking about this is, I'm going to control it. I'm going to make it do what I want to do. Well, in order to make it do what you want to do, you've got to imagine that yourself having sufficient knowledge and sufficient whatever to understand all the elements that are in place in this. Probably not really happening, right? But what is maybe a better example of this is to go back to the centropy thing, and it's why I like to talk about it. If you set some future attractor and you say, this is the point in the future that I want to get to, this is the outcome, and then let the universe deal with the details of this, right? This is where I want to be. Now let the water flow as it will to get down to this point, right? And the universe handles it. It will do whatever, because you've set it as an attractive point in the future. And it's the same, I think, to what you're talking about, which is when you're trying to control all of this, it's overwhelming. But if you can let yourself work as part of the overall system, right? You can relax yourself to become part of something else. That's when, pardon the phrase, the real magic can happen. And I think that's kind of what's going on there.
Kevin, we have another question here from the doctor. Dr. Chi?
Yes, I just try to make up something before Mr. Douglas. He asked me to introduce the experience in the children detention. So all of a sudden, I think about remember something. When we're in the children attention, the moment, because we couldn't have a chance to talk to those kids. But after that, the detention supervisor, he told me, he said one kid, she's a girl, she committed murder, but she never realized she did anything wrong. But after the Tai Chi practice, so she cried a lot. She finally realized she did something wrong. She just feel guilty because she committed murder. I just want to make
that's beautiful.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Because we were in children detention, that's the Saturday morning. Here, Daisuke, Carl, 3 of us went to the children detention. Yeah, we're there just for a few hours demonstration. The kids had unexpected strong wish. They want to learn more. You know what I mean? So according to the detention supervisor, he said they try to bring some classes to the children detention. They try different activity, but it seems like none of them work well. But the Tai Chi seems like they love it. They want to learn more. That's what I try to say. And Daisuke is here, Kao is here too.
That's really beautiful. Years ago, I got a chance to do a presentation at Folsom Prison in California. And I thought I was going to be introducing them to meditation and Tai Chi and Qigong. But when I got there, I realized they'd already had a program for 2 years, a Tai Chi Cha program. And so when I got into the prison and into the program, we went through a meditation and everything. And one of the inmates was like an assistant teacher in the program, and he had been watching prison statistics. And what he found was that the normal recidivism rate of people going back to prison is about 70%. They get institutionalized, they can't function outside, and they end up back in prison. But he said that for the Tai Chi Cha group, that had dropped down to 25% or maybe 30%.
It was 30.
It was 30.
According to your book.
Yeah, well, that's right then, because I was meticulous with the book. My brain doesn't work as well as the book does. But the 30, yeah, it dropped down to 30%. But one of the other really fascinating things about that was that he said that they called it the incident rate. So it's like misbehavior, fights, contraband, anything like that is an incident. And during that 2 years of their Tai Chi Cha program, the incident rate had improved, not just for the Tai Chi Cha group, but for the entire prison. The whole Folsom prison incident rates improved. And that's very in line with the science that we're talking about.
Thanks, Bill. We have Kevin now.
Hi, I'm going to take myself off picture because I want to look at my notes as I ask this question. My question is looking to understand the mechanisms of how meditation works, the benefits and things that meditation brings about. So we know that through meditation, we can decrease anxiety, depression. Drug users have found that they are able to recover from the physical and psychological effects of the addictive response. And what I'm trying to find out is, someone said earlier, in meditation, we're not attached to the outcome. Now, here's my question. So if we look at our behavior, and I just recently looked this up, it was actually 95% of our behavior is based on our subconscious. Now, here's my question is, when we're meditating, do we mute the recording device of the subconscious so that we're having actual time where we're relaxing the nervous system and the subconscious is not getting involved? That's all I got. I just wanted to hear how someone.
Well, I think one of the things that happens when we go into the meditative state is that, yeah, we're letting go of our attachment to all those connections, but they may come up. When we're going through meditation, things will come up, thoughts or whatever. But it's like, always coming back to the sensation of the breath or the mantra or, whatever it is, the flow of the Tai Chi or the the sense of self of the Qigong, whatever it is, where it's that, that comprehensive state where we're, it's heart-centered, it's feeling the experience of our being, or the process that we're going through, where we're feeling the breath, feeling the letting go. And then it takes us out of that mental state. And then I think what it does is it gives all that stuff a chance to untangle and unwind on some higher level, at a level that we could never figure out. And in my book, I mentioned a couple of students. One of them was a ER physician, and he started we do meditation with our Qigong and Tai Chi. And I was doing classes at his house because he had a crazy schedule. And he, after about 3 weeks, he said, I just don't get what we're doing. I don't get what meditation is. I don't get what I'm supposed to be doing. I just don't get it. He was all wrapped up in his head after all those years of medical school. And then I said, just play with it, John. I said, just relax and just play with it. If your mind wanders, just keep coming back to the process, keep coming back, play with it. And then the next week when I came back, he said, I think I'm starting to get this. And I said, what do you mean? What happened? And he said, my ER staff this week, they said, we don't know what you've been doing, but you were way easier to get along with than you used to be. So keep doing it. And then I had a student in one of my classes, and he wasn't getting the meditation either, but he kept coming. It's like he was feeling better after he did it. And then one week he reported, since I started doing this stuff, Bill, he goes, I don't flip nearly as many people off on the freeway as I used to. And so it's like these things untangle on some higher level when we just let go of that control mechanism. And, and part of it is from my experience, is the pineal gland, letting go of the center of the brain, letting go of the I and the me. And you just come back to the breath, or whatever it is, whatever kind of meditation you're doing, and just feeling, that heart-centered experience instead of intellectualizing it.
Thank you, Bill.
Higher levels. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have Brian now, who has a burning question.
Hey, Brian.
How you doing, Bill? I have a practical question. I read with interest Bill's article on why Tai Chi teachers have a high Tai Chi student dropout rate.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that over the 25 years I've been teaching, and I'm not the only one. How can I reach my students with what you talked about today and keep their interest up outside of just the physical activity that they're doing?
Yeah, one thing that I started doing was I'm always encouraging them to remember that when we do Tai Chi and Qigong or meditation, that we're playing Tai Chi and Qigong meditation. So when the mind wanders or something, or if we feel clumsy or we lose our balance, we don't think of it as anything bad. It's all part of the game and part of the process. And that's how our balance is improving, because we're losing our balance, or that's how our consciousness is learning how to focus, because we start to experience what it feels like when it goes out of focus and when it comes back into focus. But I'm just always encouraging everybody to hold it lightly and just notice that you feel better when you walk out, because there's no way that somebody can come into a class and spend an hour breathing and relaxing and moving, in a relaxed way, and not walk out of that class feeling better. So just, getting them to remember that we're just playing at this stuff and we're just doing it because it just feels good. It feels good to just let go and let the body get lost in the flow. And when we do moving Qigong, I do it with the eyes closed, and I try to get them to, just feel the sensation of the body being massaged by the Qigong motions. So it's like we're in a spa and we're just going into that heart center where we're just feeling it. And so I'm always just encouraging them to play at it. But having said that, I have a dropout rate too. Yeah, I mean, it's the human brain it has a program that resists change, even good change. And so that's a hump that everybody has to get over. And but you probably noticed what I've noticed too, Brian. It's like sometimes you won't see somebody for a couple of years, they'll get frustrated and drop out. 2 years later, they're going through a crisis, and there they are back in the class again. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, it's frustrating. But see, that's one of the reasons why I want to get this stuff into public schools. If we were teaching little kids how to do this stuff, it would be a whole different landscape. It's like I teach through hospitals, and a lot of the conferences that we do are medical related. But I'm always telling people, if we were teaching this to kids in school, most of the patients we deal with would never be there.
Yeah, Bill, we just had a question in chat from Tanya, who says, don't Tai Chi students feel they know Tai Chi or Qigong and don't need to keep paying for classes? So I would like to address that, and we do have a couple more questions. So Tanya, just, I'm going to answer for all the teachers and practitioners out there. Your practice keeps growing. It keeps changing. It's an organic practice. You get into deeper levels, and there's so much to Tai Chi and Qigong that in one lifetime, you will not become an expert. So I hope I've answered Tanya's question. And let's move on to Alan. I believe Alan is the next person. So give me a minute.
Well, while you're doing that,
I have to say, some people are saying they want your answer to the previous question.
I was hoping to hear Jeff's answer to Kevin's question.
yeah, could you just restate, kind of generally what that question was?
Sure. I was saying, what is the connection to meditation and the subconscious if people are starting to feel less emotion, anxiety, these type of things, and a lot of our behavior comes out of the subconscious? What is it in meditation? Is it relaxing the nervous system so much that we're turning down the recording mechanism of the subconscious that records everything?
There's an interesting relationship between the individual and everything else, the universe. The connection that happens there, we think about being a very direct connection, and this holds whether you're thinking about the connection between me and you, or me and a coffee mug, or whatever it is. Like, everything's happening on the right there. But the models to understand what's really going on, if you're going to incorporate, for example, the effects that we were seeing in the data and so forth, suggest that that's really not a thing that's happening that way. It's more metaphorical. And when you're interacting with something that is not yourself, the core of the interaction is happening at much more subtle levels, deeper levels. So if you, and I'm going to take off my background here for a second so my hands don't disappear when I make gestures. Just so now you can all see what my bedroom looks like. So if I'm up here and I think I'm interacting with this thing over there, right? We think that the interaction's happening here. But it seems more likely, in fact, that what's really going on, which way do I need to shift to? I need to get that way. Okay. Is that we, this was we, are really, the interactions happening down here. When you get out of the physical descriptions of the universe that happen at this level, and you go down here, this is where the connections are going on. So let me now go back a little bit to your question, which was, so what's really going on here? And I would say that when you're meditating, you're kind of stopping yourself from trying to access everything at that higher level. You're not inserting the expectation of this model of the physical world. You're relaxing out of that. And as a consequence, you're able to much more effectively do the things that happen at a subconscious level, because you're not trying to analyze them and insert your expectations of reality onto them. And generally, our expectations of reality aren't particularly a complete description of it. And when I say not completely complete, I'm being really understated. Like, really not complete, like almost not at all, right? Like, it's 1%, not 99% complete. And so when you're meditating, I think what happens is you get yourself out of being trapped in that mental picture that you've got of the way the universe works. And as a consequence, you are more effective at interacting both with other things and yourself. That meditative state allows you to escape what you think you're supposed to be feeling and just feel it, to escape what you think you're supposed to be understanding and just letting things resolve for yourself, or whatever it is, to tie back to what the examples that you have. But really, it is a question of getting out of this idea that we have a perfect picture of what the universe and reality really is, and in one way or another, consciously or not, allowing ourselves to recognize that that's just a description, that's not a thing, and to work with the thing as opposed to the description. And that's kind of what I would say. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer or if I've completely answered your question, but those were my thoughts anyway.
You know, Jeff, on a physical level, Tai Chi, in our classes, a lot of times students will talk about these kind of extraordinary experiences they have. And I think it's because it teaches you how to let your mind let go and get out of the way, you know, like we were kind of talking about here. And the most dramatic one that I ever had, but I've had several of them, was I was at my granddaughter's first year, 1 year birthday party, and she had a spoonful of cupcake icing. And so the whole room was full of people, and she just flipped that spoon up in the air, and it went hurtling through space with that icing on the spoon. And I saw it flying through the air, and then all of a sudden I just realized that I had bent down and I had grabbed that spoon by the handle and didn't get any icing on my hand. I just grabbed it by the handle about 6 inches from the floor. And when I tell students about that, they start telling me about experiences that they have like that, you know, where something's falling and then boom, it's just right in their hand. And it seems like when we go into that state, you know, where we let go of control, you know, like you were talking about, you know, let go of the I and the me, that it opens us up to that higher level. You know how you were saying that things happen at another level down here. It's like we're able to access that other level when we get out of that linear consciousness. And so Tai Chi, I just find, gives us a real physical perception of, you know, some of the things you're talking about.
Bill and
you
Jeff,
look like you
we
were about
have
to say
one
something
more.
too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we have one more question and then we've got to tie things up. I'm sorry to be bossy, but that's the way things are right now. So Alan, do you want to ask your next question?
Yep, thank you. Yeah, my question was toward Jeff, and ironically, it was something that I think you started to touch on with an answer to Kevin's question. So that whole concept of synchronicity that you had talked about in the flow, and that things tend to come together, and that in all of our lives, sometimes things appear at a certain time that needed to happen at a certain time. So there's that synchronicity element. And from a physics standpoint, you know, everything you hear about from the physics world is, you know, the reason for that is, you know, one of the explanations could be quantum entanglement. And so my question is, are there other principles that might be at work here? You know, quantum entanglement seems to be like the thing that is the fallback on, well, all of this is the result of quantum entanglement.
Right.
But is that all there is, or are there other principles in physics that there are other models, as you say, that explain and represent these synchronicities?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, I'll tell you, there's probably as many models of that as there are physicists to answer that question in one form or another. So I don't know how many models there are, but I'll tell you at least one, which is, and I'll say this one because it's the one that I think is a really good, or offers a really good explanation for it. And that will go back to the Centropy approach of looking at things. And I'm driven to that often because I have found that I've needed to understand the things that I'm witnessing and witnessing in my own life personally and so forth. I've had to relax my idea that time is this absolute immutable thing, and rather really focus on looking at it as an organizing cabinet drawer or whatever, right? Like, it's useful, don't get me wrong. Time is phenomenally useful, but it's not fundamental the way that I look at it. And in a Centropy way of looking at this, you envision, like, all right, well, what happens in the future? When did I set the intention? And you got to kind of get away from those questions. The hardest part of all of this is realizing how much of our questioning, because of how much of our language is tied into time, it's almost impossible to have a conversation with anybody that doesn't make reference to time, in some level. It's just, it's built into the language. But when you get outside of that and you stop asking so much about the nature of, and you're looking for answers in terms of causality versus purpose, and look at it sort of as a complementary pair that are working together. Is that causality or is that purpose? Well, it depends on which side of the street you're standing on, right? It's really one and the same thing. It's just a question, are you looking this way or are you looking that way? And that I think is, for me, kind of where that comes into play, because it helps me to understand a lot of things that, you know, when I look, so I gave examples of the physics, right? Like in data, I'm affecting a system of the future. But in a personal level, right, I can look back at my life and I can say, well, why did I make that decision? That doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't have done that, right? My favorite one, because it catches everybody, because it's fun to talk about, right? Like dating in college. Like, why did I date her? That doesn't make any sense. I know what I was like back then, and I wouldn't have made that decision. I don't know, but I'm married to her now, right? Like, oh, okay, right? Maybe there's something that's in the future that you're not going to be able to understand at the time, or, you know, but again, so my wife's not here. Okay, fine, I'm not going to get in trouble. But but looking back on it, I can see that there was a set of circumstances that never would have come into play and yet resulted in something that I think is really amazing, right? Now, how much of that is synchronicity? How much of that is me just looking back and trying to add an explanation? I don't know that we're going to get an answer to that, because it's not a repeatable process, right? So scientifically, it's unsatisfying, because I can't run my life again and say what would have happened if I had done something else and run it 1,000 times and see. So there is a sort of fundamentally subjective thing. We just have to decide how we feel about it. But I think, you know, that way of looking at it and recognizing that there's a back and forth across that dimension that we call time helps to understand those synchronicities a lot better. And they put them into a context that starts to make an intuitive sense, and sometimes even a very logical sense, as to where they all kind of patch together in a bigger picture. And I see the data has come on, so I suspect she's like, all right, Jeff, stop talking.
Well, the data shows that regular meditators have a higher incidence of synchronicities. Now, I don't think they have a higher incidence. I think we just notice them because our mind's more present.
You know, it's hard to say. What does it mean to be a synchronicity without consciousness there to recognize a synchronicity? So
that's true.
Yeah, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing there for sure.
So,
tree in the forest.
Jeff, we're gonna have a short, CJ, if you could put on the screen our upcoming, but Jeff, stay right where you are. And CJ is going to put up the screen on our next topics. So just a reminder that on the first Sunday of every month at 4 p.m. Eastern time, we'll have a program with either a specialist like Jeff or a panel. And April is a very special month for us, because every April, the last Saturday of every April, is World Tai Chi and Qigong Day. That was started over 20 years ago by none other than Bill Douglas and Angela Douglas in Kansas City, and has spread to over 80 nations worldwide every year. So on April the 2nd, before World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, we're going to invite different teachers and practitioners to join us to talk about that event. And we hope that if there are any teachers on board today, that you plan your own local event at the end of the month. But we can also talk on April 2nd on how to set up a World Tai Chi and Qigong Day locally. On May 7th, I'm very excited that our friend, Seafood Mohammed Essa from Egypt, will be joining us. I know, Bill, I'm getting excited, on chromatic healing, which is a energy healing system that he created. And I believe he's working right now to come to the United States in August or in the fall to do a class on how to do chromatic healing. So he will join us.
I'd just like to add, Siobhan, Mohammed Essa he's a really vivid example of how these mind-body practices help with actualizing our reality. The World Tai Chi Day events that he created in Cairo, Egypt, are massive. I mean, massive events. And he got the Chinese embassy, Chinese consulate, and the Indian consulate to support his local program. And he's been on Egyptian national television talking about society and mind-body practices. I mean, he's really like a world-changing kind of individual. So I'm anxious to hear about what it is that he teaches as well.
And just his presence, the energy is just amazing. I mean, he walks the walk and it's so apparent. June 4th, I'm personally pulling my hair out, but we will find something for that June 4th date. And CJ, you can take it off viewing, but those are the next schedules. And if you could put Bill on, because now my computer is acting up. CJ, if you could put Bill on for me. And Jeff, on a personal note, I want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise today. I'm going to say it's not enough. We'll probably invite you back again because there's so much to this.
Definitely.
Like you said, one question could be like a whole week. So I want to personally thank you, and Bill, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. It's so cool to be able. I've never, to be honest with you, I've never really hung out with scientists much. I just didn't like science in school. But then when I started doing mind-body practices, and I started realizing, whoa, this physics is about me. This is about who I am, my existence. And then I just became really. I think the Maharishi helped me because he was trained in physics, and so he talked about the quantum field and consciousness. And I just was just intrigued with the science that was coming out. And then as I discovered, Brenda and Robert's work, and then Roger's work as well, and the work that you're carrying on it just blows my mind that every human being on the planet doesn't know about what you guys are doing and exposing about us, about each one of us as individuals and our power. Of consciousness, and how we could really have a powerful impact on the future of humanity. And so, yeah, I just really want to thank you for what you do and your books and this information.
And yes, Jeff, bring up again the Nexus book, and just sum up some of the things that are coming down the pike for you. And the meetup meetings, whatever you would like to say in closing.
So I'll share if I can get the right screen here. Hopefully this will give you a little bit. I don't know if these are getting in your way from Zoom or not, but this is the book that I was telling you about. This is a novel.
I love the cover.
Thank
beautiful.
you. I actually did that. I designed that.
Wow.
You can go to the link that I listed in there. If you've got a smartphone, just grab the QR code. It'll take you there too. The book is going to be printed in physical copies. Should be available probably later in March. I was hoping they'd be done now, but unfortunately there was an illness on the part of the editor's family, and so it kind of took her away from. So it's not quite where I was hoping it would be, but it'll be within the next couple of weeks. And the digital book will probably be before that. So that's a neat opportunity so you can get a copy of that and take a look. That's a very low barrier of entry to start playing around with the ideas and just to get a feeling for it in a comfortable way. And then, as I was mentioning, if you wanted to do something that was, come back here. There we go. If you want, for example, margins of reality, that is something that was sort of on the other end of the extreme that really goes into the hardcore data of everything. But you can find a whole series of books on the ICRL website. If you go to icrl.org and under ICRL Press Books, you'll see another 19 books that are there. The ones that are written by Robert John and Brenda Dunne are the ones that are specific to the pair research and the pair experience and so forth. But there's another dozen titles on there that you may also find interesting that all deal with these kinds of topics in their own way. And then in general, the contact stuff, you can kind of see it here on the far right. If you want to get in contact with me, just send me actually, you know what, let me just put it in here, give you guys the immediate to my inbox as opposed to anything else. Feel free to email me at jad@icrl.org, and we can talk more about whether it's the language workshops that I mentioned or other opportunities to get involved. Lots of cool things that are happening. So let me just again thank you, Bill, Siobhan, CJ, everybody for coming and sharing this time. It's been a great opportunity, great experience, and I look forward to future interactions. So thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, I just thought I'd wrap it up just with a reminder. We do this monthly, and so the first Sunday of every month we will have a program, and we will be exploring these realms of consciousness and mind-body practices and the science that is validating what ancient practitioners of these practices are doing, and with the ultimate goal. Again, if everybody can go to globaltransformationproject.org and sign the petition, and then just make it a regular habit to just post it on social media and start getting the word out there. When we get to 100,000 signatories, then me and Angie have committed ourselves to, we will contact every United Nations mission on the planet to support or to co-sponsor a UN resolution advocating mind-body education become a core part of public education from kindergarten through 12th grade. And this is very doable. There's a precedent for this. In 2015, the United Nations General Assembly voted to proclaim the International Day of Yoga for the very same reasons, improving global health and improving social health around the planet. That's why they voted to create the International Day of Yoga. And it set history because it had more co-sponsors than any other UN resolution had ever had, 177 co-sponsoring nations. So I know there's a lot of debate about, government and United Nations and all these things. And, I'm not saying any of it's, not valid. But what I'm saying is we're not going through a United Nations bureaucracy. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the individual member states, same ones that voted for the International Day of Yoga, to proclaim this United Nations resolution for mind-body education, public education. And it'll take, and then the United Nations will be a vehicle to pass this science on to public educators all over the planet, because it won't be required of anybody. It's just something to educate. And then that way educators all over the planet will know about it. But also having a United Nations resolution advocating it will empower every teacher that is, or educator, anybody working in public education who already knows that mind-body should be in public education. They'll have the validation of that UN resolution. So this is a way that we can expedite the number of mind-body practitioners. All these, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, mindfulness, meditation, they all have the ability to bring the mind in the alpha state. And that's where the magic happens. And and we know from the science that when that magic happens in those individual minds, that it has a profound impact on the whole social structure of the whole planet, the planetary consciousness. And so we're talking about global transformation in very positive ways. I always tell people in mind-body classes, I have to warn you, there's a lot of side effects to this, but they're all good. There's no bad side effects to this. And so getting this to kids from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade will have magnificent benefits on the future of the planet, and not just for this generation, but for future generations. And so if you can go to globaltransformationproject.org, get involved, sign the petition, and just make it a regular habit to start spreading this petition and spread these videos so that people can get educated about this science, because that's very lacking in our modern culture. is the awareness of this. And again, I believe this is the most important science. Well, Tesla, just me and Nikola Tesla, we both believe that this is the most important science in the history of science. And it's so empowering, and it's so positive, and it's so hopeful. And we just want to get a hopeful vision out there, science-based, a reality vision. Yeah, so globaltransformationproject.org.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, and hope to see you all
Thank you, everybody.
next month.
Thank you, Dr. Dunne. Everybody say
You're welcome.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
DJ,
Bye.
can you stay on with me?
I'll stay on. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Have a good night, everyone.
Okay, you too. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Bill. I'm just gonna stay on with CJ because of some technical, I should stop the recording.